So he must have some idea.
Testing. Hello? Hello? That sounded, no? Hello, testing? Turn yours on. Push down, hold it down, yeah.
Test 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
That's not too bad, yeah, let's do that, okay.
There is.
No, it was not.
Okay.
Gamecock, the Washington County Game.
Jeff Egley, Utah Education Network.
Steve Pryor, UCAN. Todd Marriott, Utopia, UIA.
Kelly Cole, I'm the project coordinator for the Utah Broadband project.
John Harvey with the Utah Public Service Commission.
Bert Granberg with the Automated Geographic Reference Center. I'm the mapping lead for the Utah. Director, President of Marathon. Eric Eisen, CenturyLink. Craig Mosul, State Library. Stewart, City Utah.
And
you're last.
All right, well, guys, you,
Sorry.
That's me calling. I will turn that off now.
We have a lot of technology going on in this room, it's okay. So I wanted to let you all know that it has been a while coming, but we're so glad to have Congressman Matheson here today to talk to us about some of the issues he has worked on in Congress and, you know, just a number of issues. We kind of want to just have an informal, open forum here. And so I know he's not real big on formal introductions, other than just to say he serves on the in the House on the Energy and Commerce Commission, Energy and Commerce Committee, which is charged with oversight of the Federal Communications Commission and oversight of issues that affect broadband. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Congressman Matheson. Thanks so much for being here.
Okay, thank you. Wow. I guess mine's got my microphone on, huh? I need to take this with me. That sounds impressive, I'll tell you. Thank you. Is that too, there, I'll move it away. Is that better? Okay. Well, thank you. Thanks, Vera. I thought that actually it might be nice. If you want, I could give a nice long speech, but perhaps it might be better. I'll make a couple of quick remarks, but maybe we can just have a conversation, talk about whatever y'all want to talk about, and answer your questions, because I think that is more productive for all of us if we'll make sure we're talking about what you want to talk about. As was mentioned, I am on the Energy and Commerce Committee. I think it's, I may be biased, I think it's the best committee there is to be on in the House of Representatives. It's the oldest committee in Congress, by the way. It's the first one they created. It has the broadest jurisdiction of any committee. Because interstate and foreign commerce, quite candidly, can capture just about everything. And it's also energy and healthcare and telecommunications and consumer product safety. And it's just a great committee to be on. It took me a real effort in 6 years to get on that committee, actually. But I think it's just great for the range of issues it covers. And, of course, relevant to the group here today, it has jurisdiction of FCC. And to be candid with you, there's not a long list of things to talk about what's been going on in the committee relative to broadband policy. There really isn't. I think there's a recognition, in fact, that the issues have really not had a lot of attention lately within the committee. There was some brief discussion during conversations about the stimulus bill, but at that time, while that bill may have had some broadband-related items in it, everyone on both sides of the aisle was saying there are broader issues that really need to be addressed. And this is not the time to do it now in this one-time bill. But since that discussion, we didn't really have much action in that world. And the one federal issue that is in front of all of us and the SEC is talking about, that all of you have some familiarity with, and some of the organizations have different points of view about what should happen, is the treatment of the Universal Service Fund. And that's more on the regulatory side where that's being discussed, quite candidly, than in Congress right now. Although I do believe ultimately our committee in Congress ought to engage on the discussion and talk about coming up with some, what I would describe as more balanced approach about how we want to make sure we're moving ahead and meeting the needs of folks throughout our country. So I think that the agenda, sadly, in some respects, is that we have not had much of a discussion on addressing how, as a country, public policy can ensure enhanced broadband capabilities and participation. It really hasn't happened in our committee. And that may not be the most satisfying thing for me to tell you as we sit down today, but as a member of the committee, I'm just here to tell you it really has not been something that's received a lot of attention. I do believe going forward that the telecommunications policy in general is going to receive a lot of attention. I mean, the challenge in the policy-making world, of course, is this is a field that's changing so fast, and in the public policy world, it's very difficult for policy and for agencies to be light on their feet and move as quickly. And the last time the Telecom Act was redone in Congress was 1996. It's such a long time ago relative to where technology's taken us. It's almost laughable to think that Congress hasn't looked at the issue since then. So I do believe that the broader range of telecom issues are actually going to come before the Energy and Commerce Committee in a much more active way starting next year. And I guess I would close my comments by just saying, in that context, it's very important for me to know what this entity has to say, and because My attitude is, well, the folks who give advice in Washington are fine people. I am much more interested in knowing what folks in Utah have to say. And I'm thrilled that this group exists as an entity to talk from a state perspective about how we can better utilize or create greater capabilities within a broadband system in our state. And so, as I said, I didn't want to give a long set of remarks. I'm happy to talk about whatever you want to talk about. I'm not sure we want to talk about I don't want to make predictions about the football games this weekend. Somehow Utah and BYU are both playing top 10 teams on the road. I don't know how that happened, but let's just hope for the best, and we won't make our predictions on what the score is going to be. But yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's our winning team this weekend, probably. If you're looking at the odds, I suspect that's where it's going to go. But as I said, I'm happy to talk about whatever you want to talk about. If there's something that, if no one has questions, by the way, I can give a long speech. I do have the ability to fill the time. So I'm warning you about that when we start.
Steve, did you want to start?
Yes, Congressman, thank you for taking time out of election year campaign.
Is there an election going on?
I'm sure you're aware of this FirstNet effort that's going on in this independent agency, wireless broadband and public safety. How it's unfolding, how...
I'm actually not that aware of it, so you're going to have to tell me more about it.
Well, FirstNet is an independent agency established under NTIA to develop a wireless broadband network for use by public safety responders that will provide them with things like facial recognition maps, pictures of buildings, video as they respond to emergency situations, and it's established as an independent agency. There's a broad definition as to what independent really means under NTIA. They had their first meeting on the 25th of September, and just wondering if Congress is tracking this. And there was a $2 billion seed money fund, and then there'll be some money that'll be generated by auctions that'll be used to fund the network.
Well, I don't think that Congress is that engaged, quite frankly, in the specifics of how that's being set up by the agency right now. I do share your broader question about, there are different definitions of what's independent and the way you structure something. This is not uncommon for anything Congress does. Congress passes legislation and the regulatory agency sets up the specifics, as generally they probably should if they have a level of expertise. But I would submit that one of the things that Congress should do a better job of in terms of its oversight role is tracking things as they're developed before the concrete hardens, if you will. In the short run, Congress has been out of session since the 1st of August. Congress has only been in session for 2 weeks. For the rest of this calendar year, Congress is going to be dealing with some issues related to what you may have heard of as the fiscal cliff. So I would submit to you in the short run, in terms of calendar year 2012, I do not anticipate any congressional participation or attention through 2012. That doesn't mean that it won't happen in 2013, but that's what's going on or what's not going on in Congress right now.
Thank you.
We'll just start here and go this way. Lynn. Yes?
There was an executive order that came out.
Can you put your microphone on? Just push that button. Bottom button.
Button, it says push. Just hold it down.
Okay, there you go. Thank you. Magic.
Okay. There's an executive order that came out to help take down the barriers on federal property that came out. Was it about March? About March on that President Obama put out. Have you heard any more on what they're doing in the committees with that to help with the barriers?
When you say take down federal property, what does that mean?
To help with right-of-ways for telecommunication companies to get across federal properties like Forest Service lands, like interstate freeways, those type of items. That it was supposed to help through. We were supposed to come up with streamlining processes.
Yeah, I suspect, and there may be some people in this room who've tried to be involved, I suspect it hasn't helped much at all. I have been involved in other legislation where we try to streamline processes where for utility corridors, for electric utility, whatnot, and the agencies have not necessarily come through with any tangible changes in how the process works. So if this executive order just came out in the spring, I doubt much has happened on it.
So kind of a good idea, but not going.
Well, I think it's always a good idea to talk about ways to be more effective and efficient in how we make decisions. And I think particularly when you're identifying corridors, whether it's for for broadband access or other types of utilities, there's a need to be more, there's got to be a better way than the way it's worked in the past. But I'm just telling you from my own experience, and this happened with energy legislation this past years ago. We tried to work this through with the agencies. It hasn't resulted in any big change. So
What do you think? What do you think the big barrier is that's, with UDOT, we've been pretty good at breaking the barrier down, but when we try to go across BLM, Forest Service, everything else that gets school lands, it starts to get really complicated to get one path through.
Well, I'm not here to speak for the agencies. They may have a number of explanations for that. I would submit, first of all, I think they've got a lot on their plate. I'm not trying to make excuses for them, but I think they've got a lot on their plate, particularly in Utah, when it comes to a lot of different land use issues. And that may be one factor that is making it difficult in terms of trying to deploy new policies and changes in policies. I think they're just trying to keep up with what the status quo work has been all along. But again, we'd have to talk to the agencies to see if there's some concern they have, or maybe there's a lack of direction about what it really means. You know, you can do these broad, whether it's Congress passing the law or a president gives an executive order, it's like, okay, that's great, but how do we really do this? And there's not much direction. At least in the legislative context, sometimes when Congress passes legislation, you can go back and read the committee, when it comes out of a committee in the House or the Senate, there's the committee report, and you get into a lot of the details about trying to explain exactly what the intent was, the legislative intent. Sometimes on executive orders, you don't have that type of background to see it as well. Not sure that's the case here or not. I'm speaking more in a general sense, but quite candidly, sometimes when as we discussed, the devil's always in the details when you got to implement something. And so I don't want to sound cynical, but my cynical side tells me that not much has happened since this executive order has come out, and you're kind of saying you face the same difficulties for those agencies.
Thanks.
Congressman, I work for the Western Rural Development Center. My worry is rural communities, rural areas. Access to broadband is critical to them. Data show that they're less likely to have access, less likely to adopt broadband. What do you see as the public role in that, and how can we cross that divide?
Well, I think, first of all, the public role has been rather unfocused. I don't think there's necessarily been a comprehensive national policy that's been particularly effective. I don't know if anyone would argue with that, based on where we are today.
Mm-hmm.
And I also think some unique challenges exist in the western states compared to elsewhere, which often is not recognized, in my experience, in various federal policy about
That's my experience.
the distances traveled, the federal land issue, whatever it is. There's just a set of issues that are unique to western states that sometimes a one-size-fits-all national policy does not address so well. So first of all, I guess I've restated the problem. That your suggestion is that there has not necessarily been a most effective national policy. Look, I think that for all kinds of reasons, we need to look at finding policies that create these opportunities for a couple of obvious, and I could probably preach in the choir when I say this to you. First of all, it's the way we compete with the rest of the world, and that ought to be a good motivator for everybody. And the rest of the world is making advances beyond what the United States is right now in this regard, and that ought to be a level of concern for all of us. And secondly, I'm a big believer that everyone in this country ought to have good opportunity to succeed. And if you happen to live in a isolated rural community, I don't think that should limit that opportunity. In this case in particular, it's one of the great equalizers. There's always going to be disadvantages and advantages living in one place or another in a lot of respects, but in this case it doesn't have to be. And so to me that's a wonderful opportunity, if you will, to offer communities that historically have faced a lot of economic disadvantages compared to the rest of the country. This is one of those great opportunities to take away a disadvantage and really put them at the same level. So to me, that's the right motivation to do it. What's the specific policy? You know, I don't know if I have any 10-point plan to tell you exactly how we should go about doing this. But there is that question we all ought to have a conversation about it. What's the private sector role?
Mm-hmm.
What's the public sector role? Local, state, federal?
Yep.
And those are, those are the tough issues we probably have to talk through.
Got a 10-point plan, I'll write you one.
And who else over there had a question? Deb?
I want to make more of a comment, I think. I'm Deb Lamarche with the Utah Telehealth Network, and we have a statewide network we put together. It connects all the major health systems, and it connects rural hospitals, clinics, and health departments. That network wouldn't exist at all without that universal service program. So even though that legislation is really old, from '96, it has allowed this network to develop. And about 5 years ago, 2007, they initiated a pilot program for rural healthcare to try to take it from, in '96, T1 lines sounded like really high-speed connections. Today, they're really, really, really slow. So they initiated this pilot program to try to see if they could redo the program in a meaningful way. And it was really bureaucratic. It was hard to implement, but we've implemented it, and we have very high-speed connections down at Navajo Mountain for the clinic there, as well as up on Bear Lake and everywhere in between. And it's amazingly helpful for those healthcare facilities and the patients in those communities. If and when that bill gets revisited, and I realize it won't be this year, but if it does get revisited, we would love to have an opportunity to have some input to make it work in a more meaningful way.
No, I meant what I said, and that applies to everyone in the room. I mean, I think that we got to readdress this situation. You know, we got to talk about it in the context of where we are today and looking ahead. And it's very important for me to understand how the various participants in the Utah market want that legislation to move.
I mean, I think what's going to happen is they offered 85% discounts on services to get fiber into these rural communities. It's fantastic. But the ongoing program may support at a 50% level, which sounds really good, but it'll mean like an isolated rural community will pay more for 5 megabits than any of us would pay for 100 megabits or even a gig worth of bandwidth. And so the whole idea of that program is to equalize, but I think it may take Congress's help to re-equalize it again. So it's really exciting that you're on that committee.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, in Congress, every committee is a good committee. I don't want to, disparage any committee in the House of Representatives, but there are 3 committees that are called exclusive committees, which they're deemed to be such, you only get to be on one if you're there. And one of them's the Ways and Means Committee, that's what taxes, and the other is the Appropriations Committee, and the third's Energy and Commerce, which does all the policy. And for Utah, we just don't have people on any of those committees very often. In fact, in my lifetime, I know Howard Nielsen from Utah County was on Energy and Commerce in the 80s, and Gunn McKay was on Appropriations in the 70s. And that's it for my lifetime, so I'm really thrilled to be on that committee.
Yeah. I had a question, if I can just take my turn here. So what we're doing in terms of data gathering and broadband mapping in the state of Utah was funded, through ARA, but it was actually enacted through policy through the Broadband Data Improvement Act that was enacted in 2008, and I think you voted for that. But, so we're functioning on a 5-year grant, and that funding will expire in 2014.
Right.
And I'm wondering, I know there's no appetite in Congress for new programs, and funding is extremely hard to get, but the data that we gather also feeds into the National Broadband Map, which is being used by the FCC, by USDA, and other programs to fund continued broadband deployment.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I just don't think it's something that we'll see going away, but I wonder what your thoughts are on the importance of the data gathering going forward.
Well, I've always been, it's the old thing you learn during the phrase you learn your first year in business school, if you can't measure it, you can't monitor it. I think that having data is always a value. And I think that it's an important effort if we want to make informed decisions. So to me, while some people want to see an immediate final product out there, I think gathering data really is one of the fundamental building blocks to get there. So to me personally, I think that's something we want to continue to do. But I have to say, in the broader sense, you're right. There is not a big appetite for new programs, nor should there be. There's a need for an overall reduction in government spending. There just is. And it's something that everyone's going to face up to. And that means it's a question about setting priorities. Now, of course, Congress set up this super committee that failed to set priorities, and the alternative was cross-the-board cuts, which start January 1. And I'm hoping we can develop a more thoughtful approach to spending cuts where we set priorities. And this to me is an investment that's an important priority. Investments that allow us to create better opportunities for applications of technology are something that really are kind of if we're looking down the road, whatever the time horizon is, 10 years, 20, whatever, this is sort of it. And so I would like to think if we have that discussion and we allow different opportunities that are out there to be discussed and where we really set priorities, I would like to think that this would be one that would be sustained over time.
Well, we'd certainly love to give you input if this comes up
Yeah.
at any point. I think we have time for about one more question. Steve.
Tara, I have one for the congressman, and it's kind of a twofold one. First, I'd like to get your input on what you see the Congress, how functional it will be after the election in terms of this fiscal cliff that we're facing and sequestration, how that might impact some of these services that we're looking at. And then the second thought, as I ponder what the interstate system did for the United States economy as it was built following World War II, I see the broadband networks that we can build today as being analogous to that. And I know it would be very difficult to try to build interstates now with all of the federal regulatory hurdles that we would face, but is there some way that we can work with government agencies to make sure that we have the rights of way and the access necessary to build the next interstate of the future? But anyway, those two comments.
Right. Well, thank you. And Dean, I'm sorry I'm not going to be representing Washington County anymore, by the way.
No, we'll miss you.
I've enjoyed it. I really have.
We appreciate your help on the lands bill.
You've been a good partner. The first question was about my crystal ball, what I see in terms of the fiscal cliff. And just to set the issue briefly, although probably you're all basically familiar with this, the fiscal cliff is a term associated with things that happen on January 1. Because on that date, that's when everything expires. A lot of the tax cuts expire, and there's a scheduled set of spending cuts called sequestration that goes into play starting January 1. If you listen to the report, or if you read the report of the Congressional Budget Office, which is a nonpartisan budget office, an arm of Congress, they have projected that if this happens and there's no change, that we will definitely go into a recession next year. We will have negative GDP. So one would hope that those in the policy world, regardless of their party affiliation, would not want that to happen. I believe it won't happen. While my crystal ball has not always been perfect, I would submit that the following is going to happen. I think that the tax cuts are all going to get extended. I personally think they should. They're going to get extended in another temporary way, so we're going to be back in the same mode again. But I think there's a growing awareness in Congress that this continuing temporary policies and the resulting uncertainty it creates for people throughout the country, businesses, individuals, government agencies, everybody, is not good. And so I think there's an awareness that while the tax cuts are all going to be extended for some period of time, the awareness is, but we really need to take a hard look at overall tax reform and set some more long-term clarity of policy. And I see this awareness in a bipartisan way, which is really good news. And I've heard it of members of Congress who are already talking about it, by the way. Democrats and Republicans, they've already been talking about tax reform. You see it in the presidential campaign, where at least at the 100,000-foot level, the two candidates are saying the same thing about tax reform. And so I hope that number one, we don't go off the cliff and see, I don't think all these cuts are going to expire. I think they'll continue. But I also hope there really is a concerted statesman-like effort among everyone to say, but we really got to set more of a long-term policy. Last time our tax code was updated was 1986. It's embarrassing how out of date it is in some regards with the 21st century economy. Our corporate tax code is way out of whack with the rest of the world right now. Makes us less competitive than the rest of the world. So there really are some things we ought to do in the longer term, but I'm getting away from your fiscal cliff. In the short term, it will be extended. Sequestration. I think that a lot of folks recognize that cross-the-board cuts are not the most thoughtful way to go about cutting spending. Cutting spending is never easy, and it's going to cause heartache wherever you cut spending, but we ought to do it in a more thoughtful way. I believe, and I don't know the exact way this is going to be structured, but I believe there's going to be some effort to affect the timing and the nature of the spending cuts beyond just across the board on January 1. But I don't know exactly what that's going to look like. I will say this. I don't think we should walk away from the spending cuts. I think a deal's a deal, and I think we do need to cut spending. So I would not vote for something that says, oh, let's just waive sequestration. I don't think that's the right approach at all. But I do believe some kind of effort to mitigate the impacts of this overly simplistic approach. I do think that's going to happen. I think it's all going to happen, not a lot of time, in a lame duck session between the elections on November 6th and December 31. That's not a lot of time, but I think that we will avoid the cliff in that regard. So that's my first question. Your second one was broadband, interstate highway, relative. I agree with you. I think it creates another opportunity for investment in something that we realize benefits for a long time. And not to, look, I'm a numbers guy. I'm not an engineer or anything. I think the rights of way and all that are not as complicated as for roads anyway, by the way. So one would think we might be able to find a more appropriate way to make decisions about corridors and rights of way. It comes back to the question earlier about this executive order, which I don't have a lot of confidence it's going to make any difference at all. But I would like to think that as a country we could make decisions about how to do this, because I think everyone, again, across political ideology, agrees with the benefits of broadband deployment. This is not an ideological issue. It's not. Nor should it be, by the way. And so one would think that that is where there is a federal role to play, quite frankly, is trying to create some type of more constructive, transparent, and predictable process for deployment. I think that, from a land use and permitting side of things, I would think you'd find a responsive Congress. I really would. And I think it's one of the it's one of the barriers right now to moving ahead, to be honest, if we don't have that. So, but I like casting it in the same context you just did, which is really, let's take a little bit of a big picture approach of where we want to go in the next 50 years and how we're going to make it happen. To me, that's always when you make better decisions when you take a longer term view anyway. And I'd like to think we recognize the same thing. And I have to just say, getting off broadband, we also need to reinvest in the highway system, by the way, because it's kind of fallen apart. And investment in that basic infrastructure, I think, is good policy as well. And with that, I think I may be running out of time. But I did mean what I said earlier. I'm thrilled this organization exists, and I think that you could be a very important ally of my efforts, and you could be an important source of information for me. I really mean that, and I'm going to make sure that the folks in my office who work on telecom policy specific are fully aware of and I want to make sure they're going to reach out to you as well. But we're going to be dealing with this next year. It's just going to come up in the committee, I can guarantee you. And these are complicated issues. And talking with people who live it every day is the way I try to make sure I'm smart about it. So I really am sincere in saying I'm looking forward to engaging with you next year.
Well, thank you again for taking time to come and visit us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
That was great. So let's just move right along with our agenda then. So yesterday, Bert and I presented to the Public Utilities and Technology Interim Committee. The request came up with not a lot of time for prep, which is why I didn't reach out to the whole group. They just gave us 20 minutes to give a quick update and talk about how we work with providers. So for those of you who didn't listen in or who weren't there, I just wanted to give a little recap so you were aware of what we talked about and what questions were asked. We just gave an overview of the project. We went over some statistics that have been updated. Those statistics were that only a fraction of 1% of households in Utah are lacking access to basic consumer level broadband services. That means that, you know, more than 99% have access to 3 megabits per second downstream, 768 kilobits per second upstream statewide, which is amazing. And, you know, really from the data perspective, it's hard to say whether that increase has been more due to expansion in providers' networks throughout state, and this is residential access, of course, or whether that has been that we have found more providers in very small communities, including WISPs, that serve areas that we thought were previously completely unserved. So just a side note on that. We also reported that at higher speeds of 10 megabits per second down, 3 up, approximately 95% of Utah households are served. And at the 25 megabit per second and download, 10 megabit per second upload speeds, 85% of Utah households are served. And Bert is going to go over some more updates from our last data gathering round, which ended October 1st, in just a minute here with this group. Bert gave some mapping updates to the committee, and I think most copies of those maps are over here. We talked a little bit about the advisory council. As you'll recall, one of the missions of this council is to advise the legislature on recommendations related to broadband, and so we delivered some of those recommendations, provided the committee with a copy of the report and the executive summary. So that's the update from yesterday. Representative Wilcox was there. It seemed like the committee was fairly interested, at least comparatively. How did you think everything went yesterday?
It was fine. That was a good summary, too. It was very brief. After we're able to actually do.
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah.
but it's a lot of conversations.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's good to know. Thank you. So, I mean, overall, I think, you know, it went great. There's still the same questions about, you know, we had a question from Senator Adams, Chairman Adams, about what our role really is in coordinating the build-out of broadband, and how, and are we really able to prevent or to monitor overbuilding in areas where there already are networks existing? Are we doing anything about overbuilding of those networks? And, you know, the answer is no. We don't have any authority over broadband build-out, and we're still gathering data on infrastructure availability and trying to improve coordination. And, you know, I think we're well positioned in the future to be able to better coordinate build-out of infrastructure, but, you know, yeah.
Your answer on the utility question was
Oh. We had a question about Utopia, if we had the magic bullet, and I said no. So, of course, you know, the committees have been looking at Utopia, and you know, that's leading us to our next agenda items. I put the Utopia legislative audit on the discussion items because I wanted to give you guys a chance to let us know what your perspective is on all of this. For those of you who aren't aware, last month the Revenue and Taxation Committee and the Political Subdivisions Committee held hearings about the current, just completed legislative audit of Utopia. And, you know, something that really struck me during the conversation was, from the mayor was the thought of we want input, we want feedback, we want ideas. And so I thought that this group might be a well-positioned group to, sort of work with Utopia or to even discuss ideas that you guys have as a group if you're open to that. So I just thought I'd give you the chance to have a few minutes if you wanted it.
Well, Utopia and UIA represent 16 cities here in Utah. UIA is a makeup of 9 of those cities that have decided to go on and continue to further their build. And so the cities see this effort as a critical piece of infrastructure for their cities for economic development, for connectivity. We don't see the broadband effort sometimes the same, I think, as a lot of entities do, where we believe that it is and needs to be an opportunity, even where it goes down to the topology level, to be open access, much like airports and much like the efforts 100 years ago in terms of connectivity with electricity. And I think some of the issues that I hear sometimes mentioned in here as we think of broadband is connectivity to the internet and how fast and so, but there are so many other questions that go along with that. Just as 100 years ago we discussed, everybody thought that my grandma still refers to the electrical infrastructure as the light bill, and that's what it did, right? It turned on the lights. But today we all have devices that are extensions of the electrical platforms that we're putting into place, and we see that same thing occurring today. It's not just, if we think in terms of just connectivity as just how fast we can get to the internet, well, Utopia represents the fastest internet on earth. We're providing gig connectivity that's symmetrical to homes. But the cities aren't in it just to give you a better chance to get triple play at breakneck speeds or download your Netflix. We're working with health agencies and UDOT and the other other state agencies that are critical to do other peering type arrangements and the ability to provide prioritization on those networks that allow for first responders, FirstNet, I think, Steve, you mentioned. So this is more than just a play for fast internet. Utopia began over 10 years ago. The state audit came in when numbers that were produced that showed that were done erroneously, really, were not accurate. And representative in Utah County had some folks that were upset, saw it as a political opportunity, and put forward another audit. So we had the legislative auditors in with us for 18 months, and they got to see their Netflix as fast as it could go and everything else. But at the end of the day, the audit came forward and provided 5 recommendations that we need to be providing a stronger narrative. I think that is accurate. We purposely didn't provide as strong of a narrative because it's interesting that Utopia is a state agency, but we're seen oftentimes as a carrier, and we do have a lot of private information. And so we didn't provide the narrative because it was important to protect some proprietary information, but I think that was a good recommendation in hindsight, so we can keep the influx of elected officials more up to speed and groups like this, and to know what we're doing. Some additional oversight, et cetera. But they didn't find 85, and self-admittedly, 85% of the legislative audit dealt with things that happened 4 years ago and past. And so I thought it was interesting. Currently, we're in the middle of a 5-phase plan to build out Utopia and UIA. You see in the legislative audit, it showed that our projections last year for subscribers was off. And that's what it showed, that we didn't hit our goals. However, what it didn't show is that we exceeded our revenue projections for 10 of those 12 months. And so I think that was probably the most important aspect. And I think that there are a lot of political considerations around Utopia that aren't happy to see it be successful. I think that's pretty apparent. And so we don't get a lot of good play in the press, and many things that are reported aren't accurate. So I think this is a good venue for us to answer any questions and to be forthright. We have a lot of challenges. I think a lot of the big challenges of the past put Utopia in a hole. We also have our doctorate degree, I think, at Utopia as to that agency who's made as many mistakes as we could. along the way. But we've also done some really great things, and I think what Utopia is a significant asset to folks in this room to further your networks, not only in terms of cost, but in terms of deployment and working cohesively with each other to further our goals. So a lot of times what you read isn't the whole story, and oftentimes it's not even factually the story, and yet there are things in there that I would have pinged us harder on in the audit. So we really do welcome, and this is your network. It is a very difficult task to keep 16 cities, 9 of them happy, with different mayors and elected officials that come in and out. We have dug ourselves a deep hole. But I just tell you, last year we borrowed $30 million. That's a $2.1 million debt service a year. With the revenues we produced, even through some tough times last year, we exceeded our ability to cover our debt service and some of the margin that we needed going forward. That's the first time. Had we done that all the way along, it wouldn't be an issue today. So Utopia's business modeling and pricing and things we're doing is working. But we do need your help. We need your cooperation, with the state and with UEN and with UDOT and UTA and all those. We provide a different type of connectivity. It's just not faster connection to the internet. It is that. But it's the ability to do peering, TLS services, VLANs, and do those in a way that can significantly improve the lives and citizens and efforts of the state. So with that, I'd take any questions you have, and we'd love to have your help.
Lynn, could you turn on your microphone?
Utopia has just hit kind of a milestone.
Just figured out how to get our traffic signals across their network and working successfully with our commuter link section. So we're getting ready to bring on about 72 signals onto their system. So that will be with UDOT. So we appreciate working with them.
Thanks, Lynn. And it goes the same. I mean, Lynn's probably the largest broadband carrier here in the state, really, in terms of her connectivity.
I'm not a carrier.
or whatever, connectivity or.
Okay.
What are your 16 cities?
Well, they stretch down from Tremont, Brigham City, Perry, Layton Centerville, West Valley, Murray, Midvale, Linden, Cedar Hills, Vineyard, Washington, Orem, of course, Linden, Payson, and I think maybe I'm leaving one out.
Cedar City and Washington.
Cedar City, yeah.
So you go clear down into the
Our network stretches from Las Vegas to Rattlesnake Pass in the north. It's a 5 nines network. It's redundant. And I tell you, if you don't understand Utopia or our network, it would behoove you to come and take a look at it, because there are so many parts of that network that you could simply use as if it were yours, and it would benefit each of your agencies. You'd be welcome, and we'd love to have your input and help and come work with us. The cities, last thing I would say, unless you have other questions, but the cities, or Utopia, I don't know if it was the best name to start with, but the Utah Telecommunications Open Infrastructure Agency, you notice that the other agency I named, the Utah Infrastructure Agency, is just that. It's an infrastructure builder. And at the end of the day, Utopia isn't a separate entity. We're not a Quest, we're not a Comcast, we're not a company. I'm the chief bottle washer for the fire, like the fire chief. I'm a fire chief of their broadband effort. And it really is the efforts of these cities. Utopia is those cities, and it's their desire to work with the states, the agencies, and every network that wants to get involved and help and be a part of it. And so that really is, we're just an extension of the city. I'm a staff member of those cities. Thanks, Darren. Appreciate it.
So just moving back a step, I wanted to get an update to this group on what the state interoperability executive broadband subcommittee is currently working on. It's been a lot of meetings, a lot of work. I've asked Steve to give an update to the group today, so.
On the broadband subcommittee, we've met 2 or 3 times and talked about philosophy and things. On a national level, FirstNet has held their first meeting. It was on September the 25th. It's basically an organizational meeting where they came together and they passed some bylaws and determined what direction they're going to take. And the chairman of the committee, who is a former network provider for a carrier, did a presentation and gave an overall philosophical look at how they're going to build this nationwide wireless broadband network. And if you can take that and in the future visualize where they're headed, it's going to be a commercially based network that will provide the basis for this connectivity. They did adopt an advisory council, which are members from the SafeCom group. Luckily, I'm one of those members, so I'll be able to serve on that advisory council to the FirstNet board. And we have received a notice of inquiry from NTIA, which we will be providing a response to, and we'll work with Tara so that all of you get a copy of that response. Basic questions about what the network should look like, how should we move forward. There's some talk about partnering with Nevada, Arizona, Oregon, and maybe Idaho and Wyoming to provide a centered response representing all of our views, since we're rural states and we may have some commonalities there. So the effort's moving forward. It's still in its infancy. Most projections are this is probably a 3 to 5 year process before we see some real network deployment out in the field. Many of the vendors are already gearing up to produce products. I know Motorola's got some products out there they're looking at and already promoting. So it's an exciting time. There's some real opportunities out there. It's good that we can be a part of it.
And in our last meeting, we actually asked a few providers to come present to our group so, we can get their perspective on the state's role in the network. So we had Strata, AT&T, Sprint, and Verizon present. Very interesting conversation. So if you want to be, a part of that, I think that the best thing to do would be to contact Kevin Rose and just, let him know about your interest. And he's the state's coordinator for that effort.
I think our next meeting is the Monday at 2 here.
Yep. Okay, so our next agenda item, I wanted to take a minute and recognize that we have a few new executive directors. First of all, we have Mark. Do you want to introduce yourself to the group? And
I'm Mark Van Orden, and just yesterday I was confirmed by the Senate to be the new CIO for the state. I've been the interim CIO since last May. Before then, I was the IT director at the Department of Workforce Services, and I've worked for the state for the better part of the last 30 years.
Great. Well, we're excited to have you here and know that, we're ready to help advise you on anything that we can. And next up, we have UEN, who has a new executive director. I've asked Jeff to give us an update.
Yes, 1st of October, Dr. Ray Timothy started with UEN. Ray comes from the public ed side. We had Mike Peterson before, who came out of higher ed. Ray had actually been on a co-chair on our steering committee a number of years ago when he was the superintendent of Millard School District. After that, he'd been the deputy state superintendent. And then up until the move to UEN, he's been the superintendent of Park City District, School District. They've certainly been one of the leaders with one-to-one computing and things like that, and we're excited to have him on board. Provide some relief to Eric Dana, who's been filling the interim role since January. He's the CIO for the University of Utah, and then he's also been filling that role until the 1st of October. So we're excited to have Ray on board and provide opportunities for him to start, attending these meetings when possible as well.
Great. And we are also happy to announce, for those of you who don't know, Bert Gramberg is now the official director of the Automated Geographic Reference Center. So he's been working on the project as long as we've been in existence. before I was here, that's for sure. But we're happy to have you as the director. Congratulations.
Thanks, Sarah.
So I wanted to leave some open discussion time. If anybody has any items they'd like to bring up with the council, now's the time to do so. This is usually when I get silence from this group, which is why I will also say that we have been working on our executive committee nominations, and we don't quite have them finalized because we just kind of have to run them up the chain, get everything okayed, and we're in the process of doing that right now. So then they will be telling you what to discuss. Okay, so moving on to our mapping updates. Oh, yeah, sure.
A couple quick announcements, I think.
Yeah, that's great.
They may have been shared at one of the previous meetings, but since the last meeting, the University of Utah's new data center has been coming online, and that's been a very important, significant move for the university and for the university hospital. And so you may have heard some updates regarding that, and that's located down on 9th South and West Temple. And UEN's been working closely with the university on supporting the network components with that. And then a few people that generally attend today's meeting can't because they've started on the build-out and set up for supercomputing 12, which will be here in Salt Lake the second week, I believe, of November. And a lot of people, a lot of businesses in this room have helped bring infrastructure to bear, services to bear. There'll be a lot of capacity going in there to national networks. And really, I think it's an exciting event that's coming to Salt Lake City and really will demonstrate some of the capabilities that are available here within the state. So.
Great, thank you. Okay, so any other announcements, discussion items? Okay. Bert, you want to give us our updates?
Sounds good. So,
yes, have this.
All right, we've been pretty busy at AGRC working on the latest data collection that we've done with the providers. I think we've got over 50 providers now submitting us their broadband coverage, speed, technology types across the state. And those go in to the NTIA and the FCC twice a year. And our last submission was put in on October 1st with data that represents what's on the ground as of July 1st, 2012, or after providers wanted to do that. We submit that data, of course, to the NTIA and the FCC. They use it in the National Broadband Map, and they've been doing more and more analysis with that data in terms of trying to connect it with some of the policy issues that they're working with. So the data submission is significant at that level. But then we also do some things with it for planning and awareness within the state. And I think I'll start by just showing you two maps that you've seen before. After each data submission, we're putting together these kind of two basic maps, and we've done this since the inception of the project. The first one is just taking a look at what's available to consumers. Primarily, this is kind of oriented towards residential consumers across the state with respect to speed. And we make this map and we show the highest download speeds in kind of the yellow, orange, red color family, and then the lowest download speeds that are available. And these are maximum advertised speeds are in kind of the blue, purple, and black family. Is there a light that we can put down? And I think the theme is that certainly the broadband landscape in the state is dynamic, and we're seeing changes every submission period in terms of higher speeds being turned up and broader coverage. But if there's one theme that's been consistent, it's that along the Wasatch Front we've got lots of different providers offering great speed options, and you get onto the rural areas and there still are some just amazing success stories in terms of the capacity that's been brought to rural Utah. And there are a couple of places where there's still some work to be done. So, yeah, I think we've got copies of this map. Hopefully everyone's got one. And then I've got a couple to show here, so try and move quickly. This is just taking a look at the technology footprint that's submitted to us from the providers. We've got the areas where there's fiber coverage shown in red. Where there isn't fiber, we've got other landline-based, wireline-based areas shown in blue. And where there isn't a landline-based broadband provision, we're showing where the wireless service is in the state that qualifies as broadband. So we've updated that one. And these are all available on the website as well. Another thing that we've done this...
Bert, do you mind giving that website address again?
Yeah. So broadband.utah.gov is where you can access all of this. We'll do a post, I think.
Can you tell them how to get to where?
Yeah, I think we still have a little bit, we've been so busy with the data submission that we still have a little bit of work in terms of getting these out on the web. But I think what we'll do, a post on the front page that just says, here's the latest set of maps, and kind of briefly describe them and link to them directly. So I would say sometime in the middle of next week, we should have all of this stuff available on the website. Okay, so this is a map that we did in August as the August map of the month. What the idea here is to show the highest known speed in a community. So this is going a step further than just what's available to residences. This is taking into consideration the UEN service that's being provided to schools. If there's telehealth network data, or I'm sorry, service that's the highest speed available, we're using that, or we're also using the provider submitted data. So, and in some cases, we've actually called community businesses and said, especially in the small towns, what kind of service do you have? Because we don't have any information for you yet. We did that yesterday for, I think for a hotel in Mexican Hat was the way that we were able to finally turn them from gray, which is unknown, to knowing at least something about what's available there. So this map, it's actually a sink for quite a bit of information. We tried to show the market challenge for the Utah communities where we have demographic information. So the smaller the community, the lower the median income in the community, the bigger the circle. And where you've got big red circles, these are like the screaming success stories where providers have been able to get high-speed broadband into the community, which really is a place where you expect not to find it. And then we also have some blue dots, black dots on the map. These are places that are equally as hard to get service to and don't have it yet at the higher levels that we're seeing in many of the schools and other facilities. We've added to this map all of the communities that are shown on the state highway map, and some of these are just places in the middle of nowhere. Some of them are smaller settlements and towns. But we've been able to take the service information and put that on all of the places on our state highway map, including things like Trout Creek and Park Valley and Caneville, kind of the tiny places. Okay, so I'm moving chronologically. This is our September map of the month, which I haven't had a chance to show. This is really relevant to the FirstNet, the National Public Safety Broadband Network. This map is showing the mobile wireless speeds that were just reported to us from the providers in the state. And they don't report 3G, 4G, because these are kind of terms of art within the industry. They're reporting speed, and the darkest color is where we've got 6+ megabits per second as the advertised speed by the provider, and that more or less equates to what folks are calling 4G. And that 4G is what the National Public Safety Broadband Network is going to be built on. It's all going to be LTE based. And because it's going to ride on likely to ride on a lot of commercial capacity, this is going to be directly relevant to what's happening with that effort. Again, pretty good coverage for rural Utah, but we don't have complete coverage. Certainly not at the 4G, the slower speed ranges. We've got fairly good coverage on the main transportation corridors and in most of the populated places. And then lastly, for our October map of the month, because we were so busy with the data submission, talking with Tara and Kelly, we decided we would make maps of each of the new four congressional districts and provide them to the candidates. And so we don't have copies of that for all of you, just because they're really just natural extensions of these statewide maps. But we've got maps by speed and by technology type for each of the four new districts. So that's kind of what I have. If anyone has any questions you'd like me to entertain now, I'd be happy to do so. And comments, we can do it now and kind of ongoing. I think we're always ready to talk about these maps. Yes?
Is there a mechanism for updating the information on them? I noticed that Iron County, Washington County has had pretty good luck with the activation of their 4G LTE network down in that area that's not reflected. Also noticed that it was in Duras County for the first time now on my way up. Continuing to improve.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, we're seeing a lot of action on the latest wireless technologies, mobile technologies. Just because your phone says you have 4G, it's probably worth pointing out, doesn't mean that you're getting 6 megabits per second. I mean, it's kind of something that providers define a little bit differently, I think, in their different types of technologies. Everything seems to be moving towards the LTE-based technologies, but the mobile broadband footprint data we get directly from the providers, and it does, it is supposed to be current as of July 1st or after, and I think the easiest way to get this data from them is probably from them, or I'm sorry, the easiest way to keep this updated is through our partnerships with them. But this highest known speeds in the communities map and some of the others, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we take the data that we're able to put our hands on and try and investigate anything that doesn't look right, but it's by no means a completely mature product. But yeah, you know how to find me, Dean, via email. I think maybe the thing to do when we put up that blog post is just to invite folks to pass, to feel free to pass on any kind of comments that they can on that same kind of post. The feedback we get from actually publishing these and getting people's reactions is really valuable.
I applaud the effort. Well done. Just a question: is there any effort underway to correlate the broadband speeds to prices?
To prices.
It's one thing to say that
Sure.
gig is available. It's another thing to say that it's $1. And I'm exaggerating on purpose. But.
No, I think that's a good point. The state broadband mapping projects did not have a pricing component built into the scope of work or an adoption component specifically. We've done a little bit of work to survey adoption previously. I'm not sure about pricing, but it's not something that we're mapping actively. We do on our statewide interactive broadband map, we do link directly to provider websites, and we're trying to hit the pricing page, although that's easier said than done. But we're trying to hit the best landing place on their page to provide information about pricing in Utah. But point's well taken. If it's going to cost $1 million a month, it's probably, doesn't matter how fast it is, no one's going to be able to afford it.
I think that speaks to a valuable point, though, because that really speaks to availability. Anybody can say a certain speed, right? So I think that the price component is a big one. But also, what about the same thing where it's promised versus delivered in times? For example, businesses have times where
yes,
they need delivered speeds, but there's always that promise, or look, we have this speed available. But that's not the same as delivered speeds. I know last week when I wanted to bemoan the fact that BYU was getting beat, I couldn't get any of my 4G to work. at Cougar Stadium, so it wasn't delivered. But
that might have been intentional.
I was glad. I was just hoping nobody else got the information out at the time.
So within the broadband mapping project that all the states in the union are doing, there is a component to collect typical speeds. However, this entire effort is based on provider cooperation, and even though we encourage full participation, we can only really map what we get, and we can only really map what we get kind of consistently across all providers. And I would say that there aren't enough providers that are providing typical speed data to us to really make a meaningful map at this point. So we'd love to have it, but it just hasn't come to us yet, and we don't really have a mechanism to map that. We do have the ability to map speed tests that are taken by consumers. We have our own speed tests on our website, and I think we're going to move to just directing traffic to the FCC's consumer speed test. And we are able to make those kinds of maps, but we won't necessarily be able to associate those speeds with providers, specific providers. But it would kind of give you a good weather map feel for what typical users are experiencing across the state. Do you have anything to add on?
No, I mean, I was going to just add the speed test, and, we know speed tests aren't perfect, but we also know advertised speeds aren't perfect either. And so, we've got to find some happy medium between, and how we map that, because things like what you expect your cell phone to be able to do in a stadium full of people at a peak time of day is one thing compared to when you're just driving somewhere. So, those things are all disclosed in our disclaimer for our map, but, it's something we think about.
You've got cap limits, too, that are now being imposed by a lot of the carriers, right, in terms of throughput of data. And that's going to affect availability, the cost, the actual speeds. So I just think there's a lot of dynamic that needs to be measured in terms of where the status of our broadband is statewide.
Well, if you have ideas on how best to do that, we're all ears.
We've been thinking about it for 2 years.
Yeah, the National Broadband Map, nbm.gov website has a lot of what I would call almanac functionality that lets you compare different geographies and then go in and look at the technology type, the speed, the number of providers, that kind of thing. It takes a little while to get to the feel for how to use it, but it's really powerful. So you can see how the states stack up, you can see how the counties stack up. We do some of our own metrics just to get them a little bit out a little bit faster. But I think by and large, for a state with our footprint, so a western state with a lot of rural area, I don't think anyone's doing anything anywhere close to what Utah's doing in the West. You take like a state like New Jersey, and they've got different issues, and they're much denser, they're much smaller geographically. They have rural areas, but they're not 10, 20, 50 miles apart. The settlements aren't. But yeah, I think we stack up really well. We stack up, as Tara will say, we're the #1 state in terms of adoption, I think. But there's still room for improvement. But I think that I haven't seen a state that looks better, particularly, or especially when we look at the states that have real rural areas.
I have the latest rankings if you're interested.
Oh, good.
According to the National Broadband Map, and the last time that it was updated was, do they have the spring data in? Yeah. So these numbers are 6 months old, essentially, but they're the latest rankings that we have. Nationally, Utah ranks number 12 in terms of basic consumer access. That's 3 megabits per second downstream, 700 kilobits per second up. And then when you start to tick up the download speeds, it's really interesting what happens because our ranking dramatically improves. So at 50 megabits per second, we're number 11. At 100, we're number 5, and at 1 gig, we're number 5. And at the 1 gig level, the number 1 state is Rhode Island. So it just gives you sort of an idea of, you know, how unique we really are, especially in terms of Western states.
I mean, just looking at the map, if you look at a place like Piute County, you've got Junction, Kingston, none of these, I think if you add up the entire population of Piute County, it's probably 3,000 people, more or less, somewhere in that range. And there's gig-e to all those communities. I think that's really rare in places that are that rural and that isolated. I mean, Junction, the capital of Piute, it's not really even on a major highway. I mean, it's on a state highway, but it's not a major highway. So.
Brings up a good point, is you have different levels of your network. You have the access that actually goes into a home or customer. In communities, some of them may have entire community and the whole system only has a throughput and straight to customer. Effort and make sure our pipes to the homes and end up treating the various service providers are all very large. There's no way to reflect that. I don't have a solution to the problem. I mean, I know you guys face that. How do we represent all this data out there? But each connected community doesn't do anything good if they're all bottlenecked upstream. So projects out there saying, hey, we got to take to the home. We have to take to the home and utopia it over today. Get that. But we don't. How do we compare that to other systems out there that may have taken the home, but when they go run a speed test or they do Netflix, it doesn't work very well.
Yeah, I mean, and we do see that. Just to clarify, so when I'm talking about Piute County, I'm talking about gig-e to something, and it's probably the schools in that case. And the consumer maps tend to show what the provider is advertising, and in those communities, they're advertising 10 to 25 megabits per second availability within 5 to 7 business days to people in that coverage area. That's not gig-e, but that's better, a lot better than you expect in a comparable town like that elsewhere in the U.S.
And we do, looking at least at the schools, we have full gigabit Ethernet services, the Piute School District, even the schools like Oscarson and some of those in that whole community, so they are staying full, line rate gigabit Ethernet services through South Central is the primary provider we work with down there.
But we don't have the full picture. I think that's a valid point, but we've got something that we can look at and try and understand what's really going on there.
Yeah, it's all very helpful. More and more accurate on.
Add to the Commissioner's question about updates, is it every 4 months quarterly that the providers are being requested to update information? Is that?
It's every 6 months.
Every 6 months. Okay.
Right. And so the currency that's asked in that data is July 1st and January 1st. That's what we're hoping to get. But the submission period, when we've got a 3-month period to gather that and then get it to providers. And in the past, we've asked for that kind of later in that window so that it more accurately reflects what's on the ground when we actually submit it. We're finding now that we've got to move that window up a little bit just to have a little more time to verify the data and make sure that we don't have any issues, because we're getting more submissions and we've got a mature picture of what's there, and we want to make sure that now we can compare the updates and make sure that they make sense. So it is every 6 months, and there's a window that we try and keep as close to the actual submission as possible, just so we can get more current information reflected in the maps. Seeing no more questions, just an open invitation to give us feedback about anything that you see we're particularly interested right now in this highest known speed event, or speed map, and we've been doing calls with providers to make sure we're getting this stuff right, and we'll continue to do that. So if you see any communities on here that you have more current information on, we'd especially like to hear about that. Thanks.
Well, that's it. If we don't have any other items to discuss, I think we can just go ahead and wrap up. We're 30 minutes early. Our next meeting is scheduled for December 13th at 10 a.m. at GoEd. If you have agenda items, I am asking you to please send them to me to discuss, and we will do that. We are getting to the point where we may be asking for updates on previous presentations that people have given to this committee. So that's one item we might look at. If you would like an update from anybody you've heard from before, we can go ahead and do that. So with that, I think we'll just go ahead and wrap up. And parking validations are at the front desk. Thank you.
Well, have a good afternoon.
You too.
Got constant trouble.
So I got an email just before I left, and I thought Kevin was going to be here, and I was going to talk to Kevin, but he ended up not being able to be here, so this came from Robert Spendlove. And so there was a response immediately, the statement made by October 19th, which is tomorrow. Has anybody responded on this? This is with the EC first. So this is please provide your state's perspective on board questions. So there's questions here.
I think this is what we need to do. Oh, this is from the Governors Association. I think they're trying to take the pulse before everybody's had time to sit and read.
What do you ask for people to
NOI.
So this is Robert Spendlove obviously got this. He said, okay, well, where are we at with this?
I would just email them and say we're meeting on a Monday and we'll get together on response.
Okay.
All right. We're talking about within that.
I'm not sure how many, I think we might be like around a 6 actually go gig out of the gate. But I imagine, there's other providers here that are probably using their with testing.
Okay, all right, give you a ring. Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, I saw him running around my neighborhood.
Oh, you think, yeah, the kind of over in the Westminster area. Well, actually, if not, your names, I think, I'll just send you an email, so. I'll get that detail down, sure.
He's got a whole act.
We know each other. It's around the nation.
Consultants give, he's already done
We'll call him today. calling, so we need to know what's coming.
Yeah.
He does the modeling, and then we get a PDF of what it looks like.
If you want to, if you can just write an email to introduce us and tell us what, and I can just work directly with them. I'm sure they're getting some kind of a geographic, standard geographic data format out of their model to create the graphic we're seeing in PDF, so just the amount of complex compiling.
And then the other thing they want to do is put together a microwave for our microwave.
And you'll see some folks like Panera, Sienna, and all of that, they're going to bring in and show their latest ways exactly what they're doing. So you'll have everywhere from folks to the research community, internet too, and it's just pretty exciting.
Most of them are long term. Yeah, so
bringing all this infrastructure to all
we've done something.
You've done GPS.
Not here.
Okay. We're on some of the same sides, so we've got all the coordinates and all that.
Yeah. It'd be nice to put, so like I hear a lot of microwave site names. And then there's something red. When you were, I have no idea what it is. Yeah, so it'd be nice to, that would be nice to put on those maps too, because I think they get thrown around a lot, and the microwave guys are exactly what we're talking about there.
Like you said,
You guys have online connectivity?
Well, she's going on to the West conference in Vegas, and I'm just in that.
Yeah, we were talking about maybe trying to drive out to some of the counties and really talk with them in the other service area.
Well, and I think we kind of need to figure out like what we're doing. Probably going to be raised on rate, so.
Well, maybe we should try to take that same car and sell it.
So.
We've got in-state travel budget, and like people like every time I talk to South Central and Henry, those guys, like we always find the smallest problem. Like, let's go talk to you guys for like 2 hours, like be in the same room, have a computer, and free funding. I'm like, I really think it would help, especially in the rural areas. First off, so.
Yeah, we'll have to figure it out.
Going out and visiting providers, because they were saying that they're trying to read that more side team. Get some of those kids to.
Sounds like you guys are meeting already.
Yeah, we have coordination from the background.
And there's not anybody.
No, there is.
She said, I talked to the Utah engineer.
Well, actually, we don't know that they're locally, but that's what we have local knowledge.
We've kind of seen it coming on the.
I'm sure there's a person like names for strategy.
Sure,
He's like an engineer, right?
When we build out this.
Mapping university. That's our problem on campus. Like flat. Century marketing. Like I talked to their mapping guy, and their problem was to fix it in like half an hour. Vaping. I was like, I need to write contacts. Good job.
Thanks.
And what the main purpose of that was University of Utah, downtown data center level 3.
The middle next week.
And then you guys early.
We just passed right through.
Ours, we have fiber that comes in.
Not a disciplinary conference.
We make more interconnections out there at the sidewalk with other
grade's
carriers
good.
and things than we do
That's
in the building.
And in that case,
I remember getting
it's
grades.
our fiber coming through, but so we have half of that where it's our fiber, the other half's actually
Yeah.
IRU. So.
I'm trying to remember like when I first started remembering like realizing grading. I don't think it was. I think it was like third or fourth grade.
I mean, like, before you got letter drilled down.
I definitely remember in sixth grade.
One part of
We got a
they can build up into a
history or something, and my mom got really mad because she was like lying like a lot of times and she was crying something that name. I'm trying to remember what happened. I think it was something like. Maybe not. And then it just was weird anyway. Like you never really studied at that point. But I never remember doing really badly at like that.
Well, there was the conference in our speaker.
That's right.
That's right.
Had letters.
What do you think this is?
That out right now until.
Traffic gas.
It's on Highway 24. It is. No. Tribune. Maybe it's
Oh yeah, where in Utah is this?
Yeah, it's shipped up into,
I think they both did actually.
Well, you're doing the same thing
on
here.
the other side of it.
Putting our HKB top.
It's somewhere near Kingsville or
We are just scrambling to get the last.
There's reading about
You're around one, you're around two, so I don't know what kind of timeline you're working.
they have the top 5 yesterday. Did you see that on carousel? Yeah, you should totally go look. Probably buried in it.
Financially, and
So,
otherwise, we're
you ever
probably.
been to Capitol Reef Park?
We should be a little
So
further.
that's on Highway 24.
Well, I've been to twice, I've been to like Factory View.
The one thing you guys did last week.
Yeah, so
Very cool.
well, there's 4, and then you drive for you drive east, you go through Capitol Reef National Park, and then you get to Caneville, and Caneville is just south of Factory
We actually
View.
got ourselves back on.
So it's like gray, clay.
Yeah, the weird cliff. It's just,
Totally
yeah,
bizarre.
it's a bizarre area and stuff.
So Caneville, which is halfway between Victoria and Hanksville on Highway 24, has this little market. It's not well, it's like this.
Well, no, I'll tell you,
live there.
work the E-ring,
They've
somebody's
got
on the X-Pass, or US.
Did you get
Mason
salad?
Dixon. So like they make sure
Yeah, I've totally been there.
and they bake bread and good sandwiches.
Build it yourself.
And they have goats. I've totally been to this park.
So
It's really remote.
it is like my favorite restaurant. Anyone from the state.
Well, and I love the restaurant stories of Diablo.
Yeah, it was good.
That's so funny you've been there. So, because my mom, she runs a database with weather stations, and she has a weather station on that guy's farm. So she's talked to him a couple times, like when the power went out or something. So she's like, I can't remember. But she was like, I really want to go there. So we drove back that winter
I want to
power.
work. I want to volunteer to work on his farm.
Yeah, he was just like, I really wanted to start farming, and this is the cheapest land. Because it's like not that place to really.
It's called Mason Market.
We went that way and just forgot one.
And all the Euros. I mean, like every Euro travel book about it's like.
I had no idea. My mom was just like, I want to go. So we have a picture of us next to the weather station.
And they don't have, I mean, like, it is like, this structure of this little thing is super tiny. It's probably, like, you could build a bunch of salvage material in 2 days. And he's got a brick oven outside that bakes bread, they bake their bread in.
Yeah, he made he had like $5, or maybe $7 salads when we were there, and you got like a slice of bread with it, and like a cheese salad. It was so good. It was organic.
Well, I think that's where that photo is from, but
No, it looks too
the building in the photo, it would have to be like, there's a building next door looking the other direction. Because I told these guys, my friends are from in town, that they should go there. But I'm hoping that they went there and it's not something else. It doesn't look like.
Because it's definitely like all. It's not a place you think a farm would be.
Oh, well, there's no, yeah. I mean, and this time of year, when the cottonwoods is yellow, it's awesome. It's got that gray, glowing, like right along the little bottom, the bottom of the wash it, it's glowing. I would love to play it. I would. There's no internet.
I bet you could buy it, I bet you could buy it.
I bet it's like $500.
Well, that's what he was like. I was like, how did you end up here? He's like, the land is purchase it, and I thought I could farm it.
Sometimes I'll just look on eBay to see what profitable land people are selling in Utah, and it's
Really?
people just sell random plots like for
Are you
$1,000.
interested in buying land?
Probably 20 miles.
People don't want it.
It's 20 miles from National Park.
My,
And if you ride motorcycles,
Yes, I
area
have.
south of Swing Arm City, and that's just what people call it. Swing Arms are the rear suspension part of the motorcycle, kind of like this. And that's, so it would be a cool place to be.
my brother-in-law's cousin up in Canada, he bought a plot of land in Montana, and then he has and so that's been like the vacation spot, because he has all this land. And
Where is it?
it's in Montana.
Even though it's already started,
It doesn't have any real estate, it's like, well,
If you try to get my parents to shoot cabin, like you're gonna be invested, turn it up, go stay there.
Too many people know about that.
Yeah, it's kind of
You gotta have like serious guys.
yeah, some of them are like second houses, and some of the I've been to like a couple older ones who don't have like just stage.
Yeah, there's some dumps out there too.
but yeah, it's fun to just look around and think.
How's your map look?
I've been looking at like with my brother is kind of looking for a house. Can't afford right now. He just got married.
Yeah. Do you have the,
I just rent an apartment.
where do you live?
I live, do you know that big curve 4th to 5th South where the train goes?
Where?
So like tracks goes up 4th South, that curve to 5th.
Oh, that's where you live.
I live right on the curve. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so you do
Because my friend's family owns that. I
Oh,
don't think
really?
they still do, but they
pay them rent money.
did. Yeah, her grandma owned it.
Yeah.
I put her grandma died, they didn't die.
Yeah, because he was the apartment manager. He's not the owner.
Have they done any like apartments or like pretty old?
What's really fun, like I totally thought I'd be fine with the whole building. I really wish they would upgrade the windows. Like, I just go into buildings with nice windows and I totally notice them now. Like I had no idea like how important windows were to me. It's not really. They're all like, kind of more. I mean, they're from the 1940s. It's glass. And I'm just like, I really wish. I mean, everything else, like the heating bill.
Yeah, it's so cheap. It kind of good.
Well, we don't pay, so we just have these like they're not radiators, but they're like these big. Yeah, I don't know. It's just a heater thing, but they're huge, like an inch room. And I thought, because I moved in June, I thought like my apartment would be really hot because I thought it was like black tea. I barely feel it.
You know what I used to do when I was renting when I had windows? Because I did film in the winter. You should buy it at Home Depot, and it's just it looks like a big sheet of plastic wrap, and you basically put double stick tape that you can cut around the window. You put it up, and then you take a booger into it, and then tighten it so that it's like.
I've seen this in other old houses.
Yeah, I've done that. And
Maybe in my bedroom when it gets cold.
and it makes a huge difference.
It's like I just got tons of blankets on my bed, and they almost look bad because they really are warm. They're like they're really like thin. How about I heard such a conferences?
Did you guys come out together?
Yeah, I'll walk up. Where's your bed one?
It's on a UDOT.
You've done one today?
What happened?
I'll go with breakfast.
So yeah, so that's at 1 to 3:30, and then I'll probably come back out until 5.
Yeah. You're gonna go soccer?
You were like doing it all.
Today it's crazy.
Wow.
I've got friends from doing a kind of a road trip from San Francisco to
Are they staying with you?
Yeah.
I love
Soccer,
playing soccer
went home
with kids.
clean.